Welcome to this lesson on congruent triangles. So let's go over some vocabulary first. Remember, congruent means the same shape and the same size. And the symbol for congruent is an equal sign with a little squiggly mark on top. And congruent basically means equal. We're going to use equal when we're talking about actual measures, so angle measures and side measures. We're going to use congruent when we're talking about one figure is the same as another figure. So we really don't use congruent when we're using actual numbers. All right, and then congruent triangles are triangles that have three pairs of congruent corresponding sides and three pairs of congruent corresponding angles. And remember, corresponding means in the same position. So for example, on these two congruent triangles below, angle B and angle E are corresponding angles because they are in the same position on both triangles. All right, let's fill in these congruency statements below. So a congruency statement just says one figure is congruent to another figure. So the first statement starts out, line segment AB is congruent, and we would finish that with DE because they both have one congruency mark. And then BC is congruent to, that would correspond with EF. They both have two congruency marks. And the order does matter. Notice I went from B to C, so I want to go from E to F. And then CA would correspond with FD. All right, let me erase this, and then we're going to do the same thing with the angles. So angle A has one congruency mark, which is this little arc right here. It would correspond with angle D. They are congruent. And then angle B would correspond with angle E. Angle C with angle F. They both have three congruency markings. Okay, so because all corresponding sides are congruent and all corresponding angles are congruent, we can conclude that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. All right, let's try some examples. So in the first example, we have two triangles, and we want to finish these congruency statements. So the first one says side JK, or line segment JK, is congruent, and that would correspond with MN. Pause the video now and see if you can finish example number 1 by yourself. Okay, so ON corresponds with LK. Check and see how you did. MO corresponds with JL. Angle O is congruent to angle L. Angle K is congruent to angle N. And angle M is congruent to angle J. In the next example, it says triangle QRS is congruent to triangle XYZ. So we don't have a picture here, but we can use the order of the letters in our congruency statement to finish each congruency statement below. So, for example, QR, that's the first two letters in the first triangle, it would correspond with XY. So line segment QR is congruent to line segment XY. And then RS corresponds with YZ. Pause the video now and finish number 2 by yourself. Okay, so ZX is congruent to SQ. Angle Q is congruent to angle X. Angle Y is congruent to angle R. And then on the last one, we have XZY, so we would go QSR, angle QSR. All right, let's continue on with our notes. So you do not have to know all 6 pieces of each triangle, the 3 angles and the 3 sides, to prove that they are congruent. there are shortcuts to prove triangles are congruent. So there are 5 shortcuts that we are going to learn. The first one is called side, side, side. So if you know that 3 sides of one triangle correspond and are congruent with 3 sides of another triangle, then that is enough to prove that those 2 triangles are congruent. We don't need to know anything about the angles. That's enough information to prove it. These are congruent. All right. And you notice only sides will be marked for this shortcut. The next one is side, angle, side. So that's when you have 2 sides and an angle in between the 2 sides. So if you know that these triangles are congruent, you don't need to know anything else about the other angles or the other side. The next one is angle, side, angle. So we have 2 angles and a side in between those 2 angles. So if we have that, that's enough information to prove these triangles are congruent. The next one is similar. It's angle, 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 side. Angle, angle, side. So in this case, the side is not in between the 2 angles. And you may want to write it like this, side, angle, angle. It means the same thing. This is just the standard way to write it, angle, angle, side, but they're the same. Okay, the last one is a special case that only works for right triangles. So a right triangle has a hypotenuse, which is the longest side of the right triangle, and it's always directly across from the right angle. So if you look at the point of the right angle and go directly out, that's the hypotenuse. So in this case, the hypotenuse on each triangle will be marked and they will correspond, they're congruent. And then one of the legs will be marked on both triangles and they must match, so like this one and this one. Or you could have the other leg marked. So if you have the hypotenuse and the leg of both triangles, that's enough to prove that they are congruent. Okay, let's look at some that do not work. So these do not work. They are not enough to prove that triangles are congruent. The first one is angle, angle, angle. So if you only know the angles are congruent for both triangles, that is not enough to prove they are similar. They are congruent. It only proves that the triangles are similar, which means they are the same shape. They'll look the same, but they could be different sizes. And you can see from this example, these look the same, but they are different sizes, so they are not congruent. All right, and then the other one that does not work is angle, side, side, which is the same thing as side, side, angle. And of course, I'm not going to write that out for obvious reasons, but that's a good way to remember it does not work. So in this case, the angle is not in between the sides. So this one is very, very similar to side, angle, side, but that one works. So let me scroll back up just so you can compare the two. So for side, angle, side, we do have 2 sides and we have an angle, but the angle is in the middle of the 2 sides, and that works. However, if you have 2 sides and an angle that's not in the middle, so not this one's not marked, one of the other angles are marked, that is not enough information. And you can see from this picture, I have an angle and 2 sides, but these triangles definitely are not congruent, so it doesn't work. Okay, you can stop the video now and go ahead and complete Congruent Triangle Practice and Congruent Triangle Practice 2 and check it with your teacher.